I'd like to help you save the life of someone you love. But to begin, I want to first have you imagine this is a loved one of yours. I want you to picture a very specific person in your life. Mom, sister, girlfriend, aunt, someone that you know, someone you have a shared history with, someone you know their favorite food, you know their secrets, you know what they're most proud of, and you know where they're ticklish. Someone very specific. And I want you to imagine that, like over 1 million people in North America every year, this person, your person, stops breathing starting right now. Would you know what to do? This is the human brain. In an average adult, it represents about 5% of your total body mass by weight. But because of its unusual qualities, it actually consumes about 25% of your total blood flow. And once it's cut off from oxygen, it starts dying pretty much immediately. In fact, at the 1-minute mark, it starts taking damage, and it goes right up until at around 7 minutes, where you're irretrievably gone. There's nothing that can bring you back. And it's not the case in which you're fine at the 6-minute and 59-second mark. You suddenly go dark. In fact, sectors of the brain start dying piece by piece every minute. Motor functions, optical nerves, higher reasoning, long-term memory, short-term memory. In fact, over the course of that 7 minutes, you start losing functions. And some of the damage, if you can get them to them in time, it can be recovered. Some of the damage is permanent. And those of you who have a family member or know someone who's had a stroke know exactly what I'm talking about. You get grandma back, you get your aunt, you get your sister, you get your husband back, but what you get back is 30% of grandma, 15% of your husband, 20% of your son. And that's what you get for the rest of their life. If you think about this as well, the brain inside your own skull, I want you to kind of imagine what's going on in your own head. That the brain you count on, for those of you who are students, the one you count on to remember your formulas for your exams, those of you who are working, the skills that you have in order to do the job that you're paid for, all of these things. Inside your brain is a 7-minute fuse. And every time we breathe, that fuse is reset. But make no mistake, every time you stop breathing, that fuse starts ticking. And just like that. Oh. She's gone. That's how fast it takes, gentlemen, that's how fast it takes to go from a living person to a corpse. 7 minutes. Oh, don't step on the hair. We didn't rehearse this part. It's okay, though. She's alive! She's alive! But I want you to think about this, the idea that every one of us, right between our ears, the strongest and healthiest person in this room, has a time bomb with a 7-minute fuse. Reset every time we breathe, every time we stop breathing, it starts ticking. Now, how many of you here have been in a situation where you've been a witness to someone getting hurt, someone having a heart attack? Show of hands, anyone? It's hard to see. How many of you, with those hands still raised, was able to help the victim? Excellent. And now some of you brought your hands down. Don't feel bad. For over 30 years, I was also a bystander. All I could do was watch as other people suffered or had a heart attack or was bleeding out. I think the saddest thing a human being can say is, I've always wanted to, whatever. And I realized I was doing that. I've always wanted to go, and I remember the first day class in Boy Scouts, and I've always wanted to kind of learn that again and kind of refresh my memory. Never did it. Blew it off, procrastinated, and in 2010, I decided, sure, I'll take a Red Cross class. Sat in there, learned on a mannequin how to do compressions, dress fake wounds, never thought I needed. Got my little certificate, went back to my life. May 2010, I'm in Silicon Valley at a coffee shop waiting to interview someone that was going to be working for me. And as I'm waiting, it was about 9 a.m., I heard a horrific screeching of tires outside. I look out, and a car hit two pedestrian women, young women, probably early, mid-20s. One was bleeding badly out of her head, the other was thrown clear, no arterial damage. Terrifying. The human body has around 12 pints of blood, and some of it was already on the ground, and it was growing at a frightening pace. Now, the most important thing they tell you in first aid training is to try and find someone more qualified than you, because up until that point, my training consisted of one day with the Red Cross. So I run back inside the coffee shop. I said, we have a medical emergency outside. I jump on a table. Is there anyone here who's a nurse, a doctor, a paramedic, firefighter, anything? And everyone looks up from their coffees, and they look back down. So great, me with my one day of training that I wasn't quite grasping everything, I was going to be the most useful person for these two victims. The guy behind the counter said, I've got a first aid kit here. Grab it, 2 bags of ice, come with me. We go outside. There's a crowd gathering already around these victims. We'll work our way through. And the one that's bleeding out of her head, I take out the gauze, bandage her up. She's conscious. I'm talking to her. Do you know what happened to you? Do you know your name? Someone else has a 911 call started. They're going to be on their way, but stay with me. You're going to be fine. The other one, I said, tend to her, make sure she doesn't move her neck, exacerbate any sort of neck injuries. And we sit there and we wait. 1, 2, 3. 5 minutes was what it took for the emergency responders to show up. And before then, the crowd continued to grow. It turned out both of these women worked at a hair salon across the street, and their coworkers heard the same sound we did. They come out. And in their case, it wasn't a random stranger on the ground. It was their friend. It was their coworker, someone they had a shared history with. And they started screaming at the top of their lungs. And I understand you're freaked out. I am too, but she's conscious. She can hear you, and if she goes into shock, it's going to worsen her chances of getting out of this. The best thing you can do for her is to stay calm and let her know it's going to be okay. That gives her the best shot. Can you do that for me? Calm them down. One of them, hold your hand, and we wait. Fire trucks are the first in the scene. Firefighter gets out, their first responder said, here's what we did with the cheap first aid kit from Pete's Coffee, and you got the good stuff in your truck, go ahead and use it. They got it, and so they knew what to continue on with the care. And as she's being loaded into the ambulance, and I'm wiping this woman's blood off my hands, the woman holding her hand identified herself. It was her sister. They worked together at the hair salon, and all she could do was watch her sibling bleed out in front of her, helpless, watching her die. Now, she made it in this case. I found out afterward that it was close enough that the police officer on the scene said, I need you to come with me. I said, what's going on? And he lowered his voice, make sure no one else can hear, and said, this may be a vehicular homicide case, in which case, if she expires in the hospital, I'm gonna need you to come in and they'll do a deposition for the district attorney. I was like, oh. And I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks afterward. He gave me his business card, and I had weird dreams for 2 weeks. Did she live? Did she die? Didn't know what happened. She made it. But during that whole moment, when she was being loaded into the ambulance, as I'm wiping this woman's blood off my hands, the sister asked me, are you like a doctor or something? And I looked her dead in the eye and said, every time I say this, my Chinese immigrant parents are disappointed. No, I am not a doctor. I see we have some people with Chinese immigrant parents experience. Yes. She said, how do you know all this stuff? It's like literally an 8-hour class at the Red Cross is the only thing separating me and everyone else here. She said, can anyone take this class? Yeah, anyone can take it. How do I do it? And I showed her on her smartphone how to add the class. And that got me interested in becoming an instructor, because it wasn't enough just for one person to know. It's important for people in general to have that experience. A lot of us, we have this false notion that either you're in the medical profession or you're not. And the reality is, not everybody is destined to be a nurse or a doctor or a paramedic or a firefighter. But every single person in this room can take a one-day class to learn how to save the life of someone you love. At TED, the theme is ideas worth spreading. And that's my radical idea, that every one of us can save the life of someone we love, but most of us aren't empowered to do so. We're intimidated, we don't know, and we push it off and we think, we'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it someday. But in this case, she was able to make it, but it doesn't always have a happy ending. I've had to administer first aid twice in my life, and the second incident is May 2012. Hiking up the Yosemite double waterfalls. Those of you who've been there know it's the Vernon waterfalls. Gorgeous, very strenuous hike. I've already completed the summit, heading back down, exhausted, ready for a hot shower, ready for a meal, ready to just sleep. And halfway down the mountain, came across a hiker who was already passed out, sprawled out on the ground. Someone was already doing compressions, a former lifeguard. I recognized what was going on, and I said, I'm a first responder as well, I can join in. Someone else has a call with Yosemite Search and Rescue, their emergency medical services. We'll trade off back and forth, doing compressions, back and forth. 20 minutes. This was halfway up the mountain. There was no ambulance access. And so we had to keep things going until professional help arrives on foot, and they were running with their backpacks with AEDs from whatever base station they started with. They finally get there after 20 minutes, get his shirt off, the electrical AEDs slap on his skin, hit the electricity, and this first time I've seen him move. He twitches upward, back down, nothing. Twitches upward, back down, nothing. And they go at it, now 15 minutes in. And it was a very surreal experience watching when the lead EMT called code, and the energy went from this very frantic chop, chop, chop to, okay, we're done, wrap it up. And every single thing that touched his skin was placed inside a red bag with a biohazard logo on it. He went from a patient that we were trying to save to a piece of biohazard we had to properly dispose of. And that incident, there's two things that I remembered from it. One was that moment when the lead EMT called code. And the second moment, the sadder one, was that this is Yosemite. There were hundreds of people walking on by. It's a very popular hiking trail. And most people, they saw what was going on. They just kept moving, fine. A handful of people watched from a respectful distance, fine. And 4 or 5 people had their phones out, taking pictures. And that look on your face, that was the look on my face. The contemptible, disgusting disrespect. This is a man's final moments. This is somebody's son. This is somebody's brother. This is somebody's best friend. And all we could do is sit around and take photos for their Instagram or Facebook. And the reality is that most of us, without the tools, it's one of the consequences of our social media age. But it doesn't have to be that way. I want to ask, actually, all of you here in the audience, one thing I've enjoyed for smaller groups is asking people, how many days do you think an average healthy adult lives? Anyone take a guess? No, don't do the calculation. I know there's some engineers like, whoa, just intuitively, how many days do you think? And usually people's answer is a couple 100,000, 1 million. The answer is 30,000. 30,000 days. That's all we get. As adults, 10,000 of those days are behind us. They're gone. You don't get them back. Likewise, our final 10,000 days will likely be in diminished capacity of some sort. Mentally, physically enfeebled, possibly both. So right now, everyone in this room, we are in our middle 10,000 days. This is our moment when our strength is at its zenith to do everything that we're here to do. Find our purpose, fall in love, be good parents if that's what you want. Whatever it is we're here to do, this is our moment. And this is when we have the least amount of excuses. Because the reality is that nobody's even promised those 30,000 days. The guy at Yosemite didn't get his 30,000. And also, likewise, there are people in this room who may not get their 30,000. And I would like to conclude with a paradoxical request, ask of the audience to give me 2 of your 10,000 days. 1, get yourself educated next month on basic first aid. It's a 1-day course, and it will give you the skills to save the life of someone you love. 2nd, take that 2nd day to talk to your loved ones, the ones whose life you would care most about, the ones who love you the most. Convince them to do likewise. And after all that skills and all that education, I pray you'll never, ever have to use it.